Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Charleston Forum's virtual community discussion today. I hope you were able to join us with our conversation with Congressman Clyburn recently and his push for better broadband access to allow people in need of better health care to access it and for better education, particularly in times like these. We're excited to have with us today Chief Art Acevedo, and he's coming from Houston, Texas, live to us from Houston, where he leads the police department there. And not only does he lead that police department, he also leads the Major Cities Chiefs Association in the U.S. So we are very pleased to have the chief joining us and sharing his thoughts on policing with us today. As I trust you are all aware, policing and criminal justice is one of the four social pillars that the Charleston Forum focuses on. And I also want to make you aware that we will be revealing the results of our Tri-County survey on our forum discussion, virtual forum discussion on June the 14th, Sunday, June the 14th at 2 p.m. So please put that on your calendars. I think you'll find the discussion and the results of the survey very interesting. Quickly, again, I'd like to thank our sponsors for this year: the Patrick Family Foundation, the Charleston County Bar Association, the Joy Law Firm, the Duffy & Young Law Firm, Samsung, the Citadel School of Humanities and Social Sciences. And I'd like to call out some individuals who have supported us, and we have a recent donation from Benjamin Black, and I thank him for that. We have other consistent supporters who've supported us throughout the years who are on our website, and I hope you'll take a chance to look there. Please also join us on Facebook and social media and follow us, and we'll continue to update you on our upcoming discussions. Today, though, we're glad to have John Simpkins host our discussion once again, and John is the Vice President of the Aspen Global Leadership Network. And while John is having this discussion with Chief Acevedo, you can participate by using your Q&A tool at the bottom of your screen, not the chat tool, but the Q&A tool from Zoom, or you can post questions on Facebook and we'll get those to John as well. So Chief and John, thank you for being here. John, I leave it to you.
Thank you, Brian. And welcome again, everyone, to the Charleston Forum. Chief Acevedo, welcome. We're glad you could join us. It is clearly the middle of your workday. You're still on duty.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
But we're glad that you can make time for this. As everyone is aware, this is live TV. So whatever happens is going to happen. If anything occurs in terms of technical difficulties, just bear with us and we'll keep it moving. Today's discussion is really focused around criminal justice and policing. I couldn't think of a better person to talk about that with than Chief Acevedo, who started out as a law enforcement officer in California, was the chief of police in Austin, Texas, and is now the chief of police in Houston. And Chief Acevedo, before we get into our discussion, I just want to extend my condolences to you of Tactical Flight Officer Jason Knox in the helicopter crash on May 2nd. So we're deeply saddened to learn of his loss, and just want to ask how Officer Cormier is doing.
Officer Cormier today's was going through another surgery, but he's got a long road ahead of him, but he's expected to survive and recover, and he continues to be in our prayers. And we lost a good man in Jason Knox. He was just, I pride myself on knowing my people, and I knew Jason. And when it comes to relational policing, which is something that I believe in with every cell of my body, he embodied everything, every aspect of relational policing, and he'll be sorely missed, but we'll honor his sacrifice by conducting ourselves in an appropriate manner.
Thank you. And our best and our condolences to his family again.
Thank you.
How are things in Houston in relation to COVID-19? How is your department handling this moment?
Well, we've been very fortunate in that I think we're doing better than a lot of other agencies, especially for a city this size. when you think about what we did as an organization and as a city, as a region, we took the threat seriously early on. We immediately, as folks were coming back from vacations before we canceled travel for folks, we actually put people in quarantine. And at one point we had, 200 something officers in quarantine. We're down to a handful, and we've only had 2 officers that have been hospitalized. One is out. The other one is still, and he's still fighting. He's been in there for over a month now. He's still on a ventilator. And we're still hopeful, though, that with the prayers of the community, that we'll get him through.
Good. Well, I certainly do hope that he recovers and is able to get back to a normal way of life, whatever normal looks like these days.
Yeah, I think the normal has changed for us. We're still wearing masks. Our state has reopened, as you know, here in Texas. And like I told my team, I don't care what, because it's interesting for me as I think as an American, above all else, that some of the folks that were screaming the most, we need to reopen the economy, are the same ones that are refusing to wear any facial coverings. And what people don't understand is that if we want to maximize the health of our fellow Americans and maximize the potential of actually having this reopening be successful, we should all follow the advice of healthcare professionals and public health professionals. And that's why, when I first called on, I had my mask on with you all because I had just left a meeting with Troy Finner, my executive assistant chief, and assistant chief Wendy Bainbridge. But if we all just use common sense, good judgment, and common decency and courtesy, we'll be able to get through it. But I'm afraid that some people are trying to tempt fate, and fate, you don't ever want to do that. That's not a good idea.
Yeah. Has it changed the way you're doing your job, other than the obvious sort of concerns you'd have about infection?
Yeah, first, I'm really proud of the fact that our officers, we don't get to socially distance because we have a product that, unfortunately, we deal with, which is public safety, that at times entails arrests and citations. And, thus there are 2 activities that require close contact. But despite the documented risk associated with COVID-19, there's been, I think last count, over 65 police officers that have died from COVID-19 related illnesses across the country. Our guys and ladies are still out doing good work, trying to keep the community safe. But what we did is that we actually put a lot of the lower level calls, the non-emergent calls, into what we call a patrol desk unit, where rather than a police officer responding, you get to actually be connected with a police officer virtually, and we're able to conduct the business virtually, and also through through telephones. And quite frankly, that's helped us reduce the impact to our staff. We only had 42 total out of a workforce of about 6,500 that have tested positive.
That's great. That's at least a manageable number.
Yeah.
Given the circumstances. How about the conditions for inmates in Harris County Jail?
That has been challenging for the sheriff. They did do some compassionate releases. I think there's probably over 100 inmates that have been tested positive. So he did do some compassionate releases, but there was also some controversy because there was a move to try to release, for example, broad-based decisions like everybody over 50. Well, that would have included over 4,000 out of the 7,500 folks. And that would have included, people waiting trial for murder. And, I could just go down the list. Just a lot of really bad actors with extensive criminal histories. So I think they're managing as best they can. And again, we're talking about criminal justice. I think that common sense, again, goes into that. And we supported the release of lower-level misdemeanants, but the broad-based release, just a broad swath of release, especially when we're starting to see across the nation shootings are going up, believe it or not. And here in Houston, our homicides are up over 40%. And what we're finding out is a lot of those homicides are up because of the shutdown, if you want to call it a shutdown. It's been harder to move drugs. And so guess what? A good number of our murders that are we're at the 5-year high right now. Last year was a 5-year low, are related to the fact that supply, as it relates to narcotics, are down. Kind of like the supply chain that it's impacted. Now you're hearing about Wendy's not having, enough beef for their burgers. Well, there's a big war going on right now in our city, and I think in other cities, because there's not enough narcotics, and they're ripping each other off and shooting each other. So it's a challenging time, but I believe with the help of our community, we'll get through it and hopefully come out stronger on the other side of COVID.
Great, thank you. I want to go way back to how you got started as a law enforcement officer. I read somewhere that you said you quit law school to become a cop. What led you in the direction of wanting to become a law enforcement officer?
Well, I'm a Cuban refugee. I was born in Cuba, and I always like to say that the United States in 1968, 12/12/68, we arrived at the House of Liberty, which was old World War II barracks, and on the grounds of the Miami International Airport, where they were processing Cuban refugees for a couple of weeks. Then on 12/31/68, we arrived in Los Angeles, where I grew up. And my father and mother raised us to believe that the country gave us the greatest gift of all, which was freedom. And they really instilled a sense of giving back. So I always wanted to either be a deputy district attorney, which explains going to law school for the first year there, a West Point graduate, or a police officer. They used to call me the policeman growing up, because if you want to play cops and robbers, there'd be a fist fight if you wanted me to be the robber. So I'd hog the good guy role, but every once in a while I'd have to take the bad guy role just to play nice. But I really did it when I was in law school. Halfway through my second semester, I asked myself, does California really need another attorney? And I think they had like 150,000 at the time. And my answer to myself was, follow your heart. You've always wanted to be a police officer, and I joined the California Highway Patrol. Never looked back. Love what I do. I think that as imperfect as our profession is, in a lot of ways, we've been ahead of society in a lot of issues, whether it's zero tolerance for sexual harassment, or zero tolerance for dishonesty. If you follow that, that bar, because that is the bar. And the difference is not every department. That's the challenge, really. All the departments set the bar high, but then they don't enforce it. And I think that's where we get in trouble. But I love it. It's a lot of fun. We get to make a difference, and I love being able to lead, the privilege of leadership and service.
What is it that you think allows police departments to be at the forefront of some of these things you described, like these zero tolerance policies towards sexual harassment?
Well, I think that we're kind of forced to it in one way, and the other, because of the scrutiny. I would say that the law enforcement profession, especially in the age of, I always tell my folks, whether you have a body-worn camera or not, understand somebody, whether it's a building or a ring, you're always going to be recorded. So I believe that we are under more, and rightfully so, under great scrutiny, and it's forced us all along to be better. Even when it comes to race relations, as problematic as incidents have been over the years, when you think about professions, it's law enforcement that has been training folks in implicit bias, explicit bias, and cultural competency and diversity. I think we've done it sooner, longer, and better than the private sector and other government entities. And again, I don't know if it's by choice in some instances, or by the fact that we are under scrutiny, and we have to be able to build legitimacy in the way you do that is to address the problems, societal problems and workplace problems. And even when it comes to criminal justice reform, law enforcement assisted diversion. I mean, who'd have thought about cops promoting that kind of mindset instead of jail for some of these low-level offenders that have mental illness and drug addiction. You have police chiefs and police leaders that advocate for that. And so, I think the difference and the biggest problem with our criminal justice, because this is what we're talking about, right, is that there's a lot of transparency when it comes to law enforcement, but there's not enough transparency when it comes to the decisions being made by the district attorney's offices and the courts themselves. Nobody really knows what goes on. And a lot of wrongful convictions and erroneous convictions, law enforcement takes the brunt of the criticism. Yet when you look at some of these issues, including, for example, here in Texas, the Morton case, it was prosecutorial misconduct that led to that wrongful conviction, not misconduct on the part of the police officers.
Say a little bit more about the Morton case for those people who might not be familiar with it.
Michael Morton was an individual that lived in the Austin area that went to work one night, and sadly a burglar broke in and assaulted his wife, really just killed her. And the arresting agency, investigating agency, and the prosecutor ended up arresting him and prosecuting him and convicting him of the murder of his wife. And sadly, there was evidence which included a bandana with some blood that was found in the adjacent to. And I'm going off the top of my head, so don't hold me for every fact. Adjacent to the crime scene, that for years, once the Innocence Project got involved, they wanted tested for DNA. And to make a long story short, the DA at the time that ended up being a district criminal judge ended up not disclosing before the Innocence Project got involved, ended up not disclosing the evidence to the other side. And sadly, what we found out was that another man murdered his wife. His son at the time, his little boy, who was a very young boy, talked about a monster that came in and hurt mommy. Well, a kid is not going to call daddy a monster. They're going to say daddy hurt mommy, not a monster. So that was a clue that if nothing else, that should have clued in the prosecutor that maybe we should get that bandana and get it tested. And I think it was Scott Smallwood or something like that. I can't remember the individual's name, but I was a chief in Austin when I got the call from the Innocence Project, and Barry Scheck told me what was going on. And the prosecutor, John Bradley, who was the then prosecutor when this was all going on later on during the appeal process and the fight, was resisting testing evidence that could have been exculpatory and ended up being exculpatory. And then we found out that the suspect that ended up being charged and convicted, a gun that was taken, I think it was a .45, was out of state. And the first thing I remember telling Barry Scheck that finding that gun, investigating how that gun left that house was our top priority, because we didn't want Mr. Morton to spend another day in prison, because I'd rather not catch a suspect than to wrongfully convict an innocent person. I think that needs to be our mindset. And so that's the role we played, and it led to some legislation here in Texas and reform.
So I think in some ways, in what you just said, you partially answered this question, but I'd love to hear a little bit more from you about this, and especially the references you're making to technology, body-worn cameras, the Ring video cameras that people have on their doorbells, and all those things they're artifacts of the 21st century now. And you've described yourself as a 21st century police chief. What does that mean? What does it mean to be a 21st century police chief?
Well, first of all, I think it means you're open-minded. Secondly, it means that you're committed to constitutional policing. It means that you try to leverage all the technologies that are available and the science that's available and the processes and systems that are available to ensure that we can keep people safe, but most importantly, to ensure that we do everything we can to not have an injustice occur, or or a person wrongfully convicted, or or a guilty person getting away with something because we didn't leverage everything available to our profession. I mean, when you look at policing today compared to it was just 30, 40 years ago, I've only been a cop for 34 years. It's a much more complicated. This phone that I'm holding in my hand has got more computing power than all the computers that put man on the moon. We've got to use all that and figure out what role it plays in terms of keeping the American people safe. With also balancing the safety with, privacy and all the other things, and making sure that we don't do the Minority Report type of. If you remember that movie with where we're predictive policing, it makes a lot of people nervous. It makes people on the right nervous because it's Big Brother, and it makes people on the left nervous because it's civil liberties. And so I think we just have to be cognizant of the fact that things have limitations, and no matter what the technology or the science is, without the proper policy and procedures and oversight, that just about anything that man or woman has touched, humanity has touched, can be misused without vigilance on the part of the organizations that are using this stuff.
Mm-hmm. And in addition to the technology, there's a leadership piece to all of this. And there are three incidents that I'm going to put out, and you can decide if you want to talk about one of them or all of them. Hopefully not none of them, but and they all speak to leadership and leadership maybe as a function of what it means to be a 21st century police.
Yeah, of course.
First one, the killing of David Joseph in Austin, when you're police chief there. Second, the violent arrest of Breon King, also in Austin. And then third, the Harding Street raid that was just over a year ago.
Boy, you've done your homework, John. Not even
lockdown, Chief. I got nothing else to do. I'm sitting here online, just trying to figure out all these things that you've been involved in and shaped in ways that people might not expect a police officer to engage. So just talk to us about any or all of those as you see fit.
Well, let's start with David Joseph. David Joseph, and if you watched, by the way, I used on the first day of every academy, I show up at the academy and I set the tone and the expectations. We had a first day of the academy last week. You can find it on our Facebook page at Houston PD. I bring up David Joseph. That's a 17-year-old young man. I will bring race into it just because it's just to be fully transparent. A young man, African American, 17 years of age, ends up totally naked in a low crime neighborhood, broad daylight. An officer by the name of Jeffrey Freeman. I pride myself on knowing my officers. Sweetest guy you'll ever meet. Nice guy. But he gets a call of a naked man in this neighborhood. He spots David Joseph. You can actually find this incident online if you research, and probably even the video, which is very hard to watch. He gets out of his car with his gun in his hand for an unarmed 17-year-old. And forget the age, because at 17 physically, you're probably not. But for an unarmed, let's say young man, gets out with his firearm, his service pistol in his hand, gets David Joseph's attention, and next thing you know, David Joseph is running at my officer at full speed. When he gets to about 10 feet from the officer double taps, shoots two times. David Joseph goes down. They do the right thing. They start administering aid right away, but he ends up dying. I ended up firing that officer, and the union and his supporters were livid because I think that when you look at the fact that when you look at a human being and your first thought is to come out with a gun in your hand for a naked guy that means to me that you're having a hard time processing your fear. And assessing the threat. Because when you come out with your gun in your hand, you just potentially limited your force options, a deadly force, for what I would argue is a non-deadly force encounter, just a naked guy standing there. And so I fired him. It got really controversial with the union. And what I did in March of 2016, I did 30 90-minute roll calls across the city. That takes a lot of energy because, again, our job as leaders is to take away the emotion. Did I fire the officer because I thought that he was a bad human being? No. I fired him because he used deadly force, and in my mind, it was not objectively reasonable. Now, let me change the scenario a little bit. He comes out with his, baton or pepper spray or some other use just to be ready, because we know that we're dealing with somebody that's in an altered state of mind.
Right.
That's not usual. That's not usual behavior. But I teach my trainees, from my officers from day one, utilize time, distance, numbers, backup, cover, and concealment, so you can maximize the potential for everybody to go home. And this is one of the cases I use. So, but let's say that he had that David Joseph had closed the gap. They're in the fight for their life. David Joseph rips off his little mic cord, starts trying to choke him out. That may be a different situation, but that's not what happened here. Not a scratch on the officer, and he kills, and he double taps him like a rabid dog. And I always tell my officers, how would you feel if your child went off to college or in high school and they're at a party and somebody slips them a Mickey? Next thing you know, your kid's a good kid, never been in trouble, doesn't have any mental illness, nothing, straight A student, ends up naked in the middle of the street. And this altered state of mind, through no fault of their own, ends up running toward an officer, and the officer just double taps him like, again, a rabid dog. How angry would you be?
Yeah, it's a fatal mistake.
It's a fatal mistake. And I'm not going to wait till we do a second fatal mistake once, because, sadly, Mr. Simpson, that people, no matter how much we train people, no matter how good of a job we do on background training, in-service training, you really never know 100%. You can never 100% guarantee how somebody's going to react in any given situation when they know it's real world, real life. And when they show that they can't control it, it's time to move on. So I hope that captured that. But I got a 5-day suspension after that. I lost 5 days of pay from my African-American city manager because I had the goal to work with Black Lives Matter. Yeah. And I had a press conference with these young Black activists that stood with me at headquarters. And in his words, not mine, the union got mad, the police union, and the city manager asked me, well, how dare you bring in the enemy to police headquarters?
Would you do it again?
Absolutely. It's the right thing to do. I think that leadership is about doing your job, not keeping your job. And like I've told my team, I'd rather lose my job for doing it than keeping it by not doing it. And the biggest problem in American policing is not the cops. Most police officers, even our greatest critics would say, most police officers are good, ethical, well-reasoned, dedicated professionals. The problem with American policing ain't the cops. It's the people that wear these stars. Either they don't want to piss off the unions, or they don't want to piss off the community. And what they should do is focus on doing the right thing for the right reason. Let the chips fall where they may. So yeah, I would absolutely do it again. That was in a time when we were having officers killed, the Dallas 5 and the New York officers, the Baton Rouge, and I brought in the activists just to try to tamp everything down. I need some guy with mental illness to show up in my city and shoot up a bunch of other, police officers. And if the union can't understand that part of our job as leaders is to help calm everybody down, that's on them. That's not on me.
Then how is it that you're the head of the Major Cities Police Chiefs Association?
Yeah.
And you said the problem is the people with these stars.
Yeah.
How is it that you get to become the leader of a group when you're a traitor to the class? If you feel like that's the case.
Well, because I think that most of the people around the table at Major City Chiefs are actually of the right mindset, the vast majority. As a matter of fact, the NAACP just sued the administration in Washington over the crime commission. I don't know if you've seen the lawsuit yet, the ongoing crime commission they put together. Mm-hmm. And they said that the only real, paraphrasing, the only critical thinkers that are there in that group that would represent some progressive thought is the major city chief. So I think that most of us, most of the big city chiefs are of the right mindset. The problem is that you have 18,000 police departments in this country with, and not all are built, equally. And, I really believe in consolidation of police services, of government services, because you get some continuity, you get some consistency. But no one knows where Ferguson starts and Houston ends, and where, any other city. With social media nowadays and cyberspace, it all becomes one big blur, and we're all hurt when people aren't held accountable, no matter where it happens in law enforcement.
I'd love to get your perspective on a current issue that doesn't directly involve policing. But the recent shooting and killing of the jogger in Georgia, Ahmaud Arbery. Does that in any way implicate what should have happened under those circumstances?
I know what you're talking about. I because of everything that's going on, I just had the officer involved, line of duty death, a lot going on here. Mm-hmm. I haven't paid close attention, mm-hmm. but I can tell you that when you look at the way in criminal justice, and I've told this to my people, two similarly situated set of circumstances.
Yeah.
If anyone that says that race doesn't at times have an impact or factor in on how an issue is handled is not being honest with themselves. Mm-hmm. And I think a guy jogging, I can tell you in our city, a guy jogging and gets shot for jogging, there's a high probability that same night you're going to jail. Yeah. But I don't know, again, all the facts on it. Mm-hmm. But it's a problem. And it's something that you can't address a problem unless you admit that you have a problem in the first place. It's kind of like if you're a person of faith, you got to admit the sin to be able to get to be absolved. You can't be absolved of a sin if you don't admit there's a sin in the first place. So it is a challenge. Just like when we have an incident and my cops mm-hmm. get mad, I always change the scenario and I said, let's make the victim a cop.
Yeah.
Now, how are you going to handle it, right? And quite frankly, when you paint that picture, it's hard to push back.
Yeah, it's a different outcome.
Yeah, certainly.
We've got one question that's come in from someone who's watching us, and the question is it relates to a comment that you made earlier. It says there seems to be a culture in police departments to allow officers to resign rather than fire them for misconduct, and the questioner says that that's happened locally. Some officers have been allowed to resign and have just been hired on by other departments in the area. Yeah. You stated you fired an officer. How did you make that shift in your mind to fire rather than be allowed to resign?
Well, that's a really good question. And here's what I would say. Well, there's a process depending. Some places you have civil service protection, some places you don't. So depending on the law and the rules of engagement in a jurisdiction depends on what can happen. You have to follow a certain process. For example, if a guy, I have to give somebody 48-hour notice and they have to have a hearing with me if I'm going to fire somebody. So if someone knows that or thinks they're going to get fired and there's no way to stop them from resigning because they have the notice. And that happened to me in Austin with the controversial shooting involving Larry Jackson, who was an African-American mm-hmm. that tried to pass a stolen check. And then one of my guys at the time went in foot pursuit and then shot him. I don't know if you remember, if you're familiar with that case. Well, that officer, that detective resigned. I had no way to stop him. The issue to me, whether it's a resignation or not, the issue is the gypsy cops that resign, then they go get another job somewhere else. The issue is the next agency, why are you hiring them? Because arbitration can be a crapshoot sometimes when the folks appeal. So a lot of chiefs would rather get rid of the problem and know that at the end of the day, that city, that community that you're responsible for doesn't have to deal with them, than to lose an arbitration. But I'm happy to say that in all my years as a chief, when I've fired people, and sadly I've had to fire quite a few, our win average in terms of being upheld is about 975. So we do pretty well.
Yeah, more than pretty well.
Yeah. They told me it was 50-50 when I got to Texas. I said, well, let me tell you something. I'm gonna try to be consistent. I'm gonna try to be fair. And I think that consistency is really important. If you're not consistent in your application of your rules and regulations and the law and your disciplinary matrix, then you end up losing. But I try to be consistent. I think that's helped over the years. The other thing that I'm going to throw out right now, since your listeners are watching, is that people get angry. Why did you take away the retirement?
Yeah.
Well, I don't have, in most cases, we don't have the authority or the legal authority to take away retirement. And even if you wanted to, you couldn't. So that's really important too for folks to realize that what we'd like to do and what we can do legally are two different things sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. You mentioned when we first started out that Officer Knox was the embodiment of relational policing.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit more about what relational policing is and what values inform that.
Well, first of all, we are in the people business. I don't care how much technology you have. I don't care how much science you have. At the end of the day, we are in a business where we operate with the consent of the community that we serve, and it's all about people. And so I stopped. One day I was at a conference with my city manager, the same one that gave me the 40-hour suspension. I'm kind of over it, I think. Anyway, so it was all about police legitimacy, and I started thinking about, I'm tired of talking about community policing, because too many police chiefs and I caught in that same trap. Well, you know what, community policing, we just don't have the time. We don't have enough cops. We don't have enough uncommitted time on patrol. They're just going from call to call. And as I was sitting in this discussion, I started thinking to myself, what does the number of officers have to do with the quality of the officers we have? What does the number of officers, the uncommitted patrol time, have to do with the content of somebody's heart, of the way we treat people? And so I came up with the idea of that, we need to build relationships. Even when we're arresting somebody, we can build a relationship if we're treating them right. So I came up with the acronym TREAT, which is TREAT. And to me, it all starts with transparency. We're operating at a time where the mistrust of government is a fever pitch. In the last 10, 15 years, nobody trusts government. There's a lot of anger, and we're the most visible cog of government. Then we got to look at the R, which is really about respect, and respect starts with self-respect. You got to respect yourself, your organization, your chain of command, and then you got to respect the people that we come in contact with, and then we have to engage. You can't build a relationship sitting in a police car. When you got a little downtime, get out, go start throwing a ball around with some kids. Go talk to the store owners or the managers in the business district. Engage, constant engagement outside of the 911 call loop when possible. And then when we operate in a transparent, respectful, and we engage people in a transparent, respectful manner, what we're building is emotional capital, something that we're going to need to draw on when we do have the Harding Street situation or the David Joseph incident or the Breon King incident. You're going to have, there's no magic pill that's going to result in 100% perfection. Perfection it's not part of the human condition. The one thing we know, the true constant, is that we're imperfect as creatures. So you want to engage to build that emotional capital, and then you got to hold people accountable. If you say when you come to Houston, ask any officer. I tell them from the day I got here, go, if you want to survive, it starts with the truth. If you lie, you die. And I always tell people, ask any officer in Houston, if you lie, what happens? If they don't tell you you lie, you die, I'll buy you lunch. So we got to hold people accountable, including each other. And then the last thing, if we're transparent, we're respectful, we're engaging, we're building emotional capital, We hold each other accountable. We're going to build trust in the back end. And I think this is a mutual responsibility between churches, between different faiths, between neighbors, friends. But for us, it's not just a mutual responsibility. It is a sworn duty. We took a duty to treat people this way. And let me just say one last thing that I talked about with relational policing. If, in fact, here in Houston, we are the most diverse city and the most diverse nation, which I believe it makes us the most diverse city on earth, right? Big city on earth. If we're going to really engage in relational policing, there's the old adage, treat people the way you want to be treated. Mm-hmm. You want to others as you'd want to. Okay, wrong. Because it's not one size fits all.
Yeah.
The true tense relational policing requires us to be competent in terms of culturally competent, in terms of understanding the community that we serve. That way, when we do that, understand people's customs, traditions, values, we do everything we can to treat people the way they want to be treated.
You meet them where they are.
That's exactly right. So that's to me what relational policing is about. And I think if we all followed that, Jason Knox, this kid was an ambassador. He was an amazing young man, and he was the epitome of relational policing. It's just, it's such a loss. But I think that if we carry him in our heart and our actions, that we'll be in a good space.
What does that approach look like in a community that a friend of mine who lives in Austin but is from Houston described as communities that are both overserved and underserved by the police? What does relational policing do for those communities?
I think first of all, people have to know that we care, right? They have to know that we value them. They have to know that we feel their pain, and there's a way to do our job. Look, we don't write laws, we enforce the laws. But I always tell people that the difference between relational policing and actually being thoughtful is that kind of like the controversy with this right now, right? Some people think that we need to just hammer everybody. I say, don't just enforce the letter of the law, enforce the spirit of the law. Enforce, bring a humanistic approach to what you do. And what's interesting is there's a guy named Chaz Moore who helped start the Austin Justice Coalition. And Chaz is a young African-American activist from Houston who's in Austin. And what I told him is that, look, what we have to do is we need to get you to go do some surveying. So we got in Chicago, one of the organizations there got them some funding. They want to go do some surveying in the communities of color in Austin. And when you talk to Chaz, you know what's going to tell you, how people say, we need to move police. It's usually people that are white liberals we have too many cops in the neighborhood. I said, go down there, because I think that sometimes people say they're the community of that people say, hey, the community this and community that. I always say, I call that the community of 10. It's the same 10 people that show up to City Hall. They don't even live in the community they're trying to represent or they assume they represent. We sent them down there to East, not us, but we got them the funding to go down there. And what Chaz Moore was amazed at how much support the police had. He couldn't believe it. In the communities of color, here's the difference. People that are poor people, including poor white people, people of color, they want the law to be enforced. They want to live in peace. They want to live in safety. What they want respect. And they don't want to be with the stop and frisk mentality that just because you live in a poor neighborhood and you're out past 11 o'clock at night, you must be up to no good. So they're going to stop you for any reason and harangue you. And so it's all about a balance. It's about a mindset, and what's interesting is that Chaz talks about is that people would say to him, this cop, this cop, this cop, this cop, cops that worked with the neighborhood, understand relational policing, engage the community. They're great cops. But that other cop down, 5 miles away, I don't know. That guy's engagement, transparency, familiarity breeds trust. And at the end of the day, life's about relationships. When it's like I always tell my cops, when you take somebody to jail, you arrest somebody and they end up thanking you, boy, you know that somehow you've connected with them.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So it's all about respect.
I want to shift gears a little bit, but it's a related question. When you talk about respect and engagement with communities and being sort of enlightened officers, some people might see that as being soft. Some people might see that as being lenient. And you gave an example once about the difference between Travis County and Williamson County, and why someone might engage in activity in Travis County versus Williamson County. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that relates to relational policing?
Well, how much time have you spent on the internet? Oh, Lord. Okay. Well, look, hey, listen. I always say do not confuse kindness with weakness, okay? Yeah. Because I can just tell you the one thing about this, Chief, is that I anger the extreme left and the extreme right equally sometimes. And I always tell them, what's really interesting is that the extreme right and the extreme left hate each other, yet the one thing they have in common is they're extreme, while the rest of us try to be pragmatic. Look, I think that we don't want to be tough on crime. I don't want to be soft on crime. I want to be appropriate on crime, which means that, we make decisions based on what's the threat that this person poses to the safety. I think that, to me, policing is about public safety. It's not about punishment. It's not about tough. It's not about weak. And so we don't want our kindness to make us a target. And so in Austin, Travis County, real progressive county, but we are wedged between Williamson County, which is the Hang'em High County, and Hayes County, which was similar. Now both counties are changing very quickly. So I think as young people are a little bit more thoughtful than the baby boomers, right? They're more into the New Testament than the Old Testament as it relates to criminal justice, and that's not a bad thing. And so to me, it's about. And so what happened is I do the example of hardcore drug dealers that we have them on audio and on video, and we can actually do this in Harris County now too, because this place is getting a little crazy. And we try to do the big drug deal or the drug deal on the gas station and then on the northwest side of an intersection, where that intersection on the southwest side would be northwest side would be Williamson County, which is the Hang'em High County.
Yep.
And southeast side at the Exxon, it was Travis County. I swear to you, God is my witness, we'll go find these if you want to. Crooks would say, "Oh, wait a minute, we don't want to do it at the Exxon. That's Travis County."
Yeah.
We don't want to do it at whatever. I think I said Mobile, whatever, the Shell. We don't want to do it at the Shell in the northwest corner. That's Williamson County. They're tough there. Let's go do it at the Exxon, the southeast corner, because that's Travis County.
Yeah.
True stories. And here in Harris County, we're starting to get that. And, it's kind of like John Whitmire. Have you ever heard of John Whitmire? He's the dean of our Senate here in Texas, chair of public safety. He goes on patrol with me in a black and white every New Year's Eve. That's our new tradition. So if you want to find us on New Year's Eve, we just go 10-8 in the black and white, turn on the MDT. And I remember my very first New Year's Eve here, I've got the dean of the Senate with me. And it was my first, I'd only been here a month, so I wasn't comfortable going out with myself just yet because I could barely find the office. And so I had this young officer with us. And this is this is what I'm talking about on these issues. And I'll give you the example on the left. So this is the one to the people to the right that want to hang everybody. We stop an individual for whatever reason, I can't remember now. As he gets out of his car, he checks a couple of rocks,
Mm-hmm.
right? So of either crack or meth. I don't remember what it was now. Well, that's a felony, right? I mean, it's a felony. He's in possession of controlled substance. My officer was so proud of himself. You know, he's got the brand new chief here in Houston. He's got a good felony arrest. This guy on New Year's Eve has his work uniform on,
Mm-hmm.
which to me in my business, that means it's a clue.
Yeah.
He's functional. He might have a little dope addiction maybe, but he's functional. He's got a job. Now, because we're arresting him, we got to impound his car. I go to open this car door. There's a picture of a beautiful little boy, probably about 7 or 8 years old. And it broke my heart because I started thinking to myself, how are we making the community safer by taking this guy, impounding his car, arresting him? Next thing you know, he loses his job because he couldn't bail out to the following week. And then, you know, human nature being what it is, he spirals, there's pressure at home. You know, his wife and him get in an argument. He slaps her in anger out of emotion. Now instead of helping this guy by getting him some treatment,
Mm-hmm.
you see, we criminalized addiction in that case. He wasn't stealing. So that's the progressive side of me.
Yeah.
Now let me give you my conservative side of me. One of my elected officials want to empty juvenile hall here.
Mm-hmm.
Because of COVID. We have 117 people in what we call juvenile hall. But this is Harris County. So we only have 117. There's 6.7 million people around here, of 2.4 million in Houston. To be in juvenile hall, you got to be a pretty bad actor, okay? The kid stealing tennis shoes is not the guy that's going to be in juvenile hall. So the exact words were, these are just children. They belong home with their families. Well, the 114, this is what we really have, these children. I call it's youthful offenders, not 11 murderers, 2 capital murderers, 59 aggravated assault suspects, aggravated robbers. So to me, I don't want to be soft on crime. I don't want to be weak on. I want to be appropriate. I want to be smart. You know, prisons should be for people that are hurting people that we should be afraid of, not because of the color of their skin, not because of their socioeconomic standing, but because of the nature of their actions. People that are hurting people, I ain't got no use for them. I'm sorry. I just don't. You know, it's kind of like when I stand up for immigrants and the immigrant community, the activist community for immigrants want me to go, hey, if you know you're undocumented, okay, especially in this environment, you should not go out committing, violence on people and stuff. So, but if you get stopped for unlicensed driver, that's a different story, because the only reason you're unlicensed is because we won't allow you to go test and pay for one and stuff. So I think that common sense, John, if I could call you John,
yes.
I feel like I know you because I know you know me based on your research. I feel like if we just followed our hearts in terms of our humanity and common sense, we'd be in a much better place.
I thank you for that. And I just want to ask you one more question that flows from that and goes back to some of the comments you made about, you know, what's appealing to people on the right, what's appealing to people on the left. What's one thing that you think everyone could come around to support as it relates to criminal justice reform or policing right now?
One thing that, that's a really tough one. Let me think about that. One thing that everyone could
what's one thing we could get behind right now?
Well, I'll tell you right now that in a death penalty case, if there's anything that potentially has any type of DNA, that it all must be exhausted in terms of testing.
That's a good one. I appreciate
that was. I didn't know that was coming. I'm sure there's more. There's more that are out there, but I think that's. Hey, look. It's just if we're going to take somebody's life as a state, we should make sure that we've exhausted all evidence. Anything that could be exculpatory in nature has to be explored, especially now that DNA, it seems like we're being able to extract more and more The science is getting better. We should all demand that every available scientific methodology is employed when available before we take somebody's life.
Thank you for that.
Yeah,
Chief Acevedo, like any good conversation, we could keep going with this, and I wish we could.
Yeah, I mean, I never talked about Breon King. I never talked about, but I could talk about this stuff forever.
And you live in one of the best food cities in the world, and I know you like to cook and you like to eat. So we can tell by
looking at me I like to eat.
The last thing I want to share with you is we got a message from Chief Luther Reynolds in Charleston.
Oh yeah.
He says hello and thank you for taking the time to share everything with us. He calls you a trusted colleague and friend, and that you're leading with integrity and by example. So
thanks, Luther. Well, ditto to him, and thank you all for having this good conversation. Look forward to having another one soon.
Thank you for your service and be safe.
Be safe. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.